Hello and welcome to Policy and Politics with me, Tarun Nangia. Today, we are going to discuss the sanctions imposed by uh, the American government led by President Joe Biden on Russia in response to the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, who was a opposition leader in Russia. And there were allegations that he was poisoned at the instance of some very high powered people within the Russian government. Uh, but that is point number one. Point number two, while the American government imposed sanctions on Russia because of this issue, it refuses to take any such tough actions on China. So, can we say that Joe Biden-led American government is tough on Russia and soft on China? But the second point is, what implications does have it for India? Because Russia remains a long time military supplier to India, which and also transfers technology to us. But America is also emerging as a military hardware supplier to India. Uh, but in addition, America also is one of our strongest trade partners. It's number two as far as I understand. But most important, we've got a good surplus with America in terms of trade. So America is very important. Secondly, from the point of view that a lot of Indian talent has found prosperity life, not from now, but for the past 4 or 5 decades on the American soil. So it's not such an easy issue. And for all of this, I have with me a special guest. I have with me Ambassador Jayant Dasgupta. He served as India's ambassador to the World Trade Organization. Sir, thank you for joining us. Uh, and I would request you to lay the ground first. When you first read this news about sanctions on Russia, what did come to your mind?
I think the present sanctions have to be viewed in perspective, because in 2014, when the Russians occupied Crimea, there were sanctions against the Russians. And that was imposed by the Obama administration, of which President Biden was the vice president. He was a part of that. Then came the second incident, the Sergei Skripal. He was a Russian agent, but he had fled to the UK, and he was staying there in Salisbury. And he was poisoned in March 2018, he and his daughter. And of course, as an offshoot of that, they threw away the poison, which in the case of Alexei Navalny is the same poison which is called Novichok. So that poison was thrown away, and somebody else picked it up and took it home, the bottle, and his wife used it and died as a consequence. So there were sanctions imposed by the West and the US on the Skripal incident. The third one is Alexei Navalny was poisoned in August 2018. And there are unconfirmed reports that they used the same Novichok, which was used in his perhaps underwear. And he contracted this illness, very serious illness. He was removed to Germany. Before that, of course, he had been a dissident of President Putin. And there is a conjecture that that is perhaps the reason why the Russian establishment moved against Alexei Navalny. Be that as it may, Navalny survived, and he had been on parole before that. So when he decided to come back to Russia, he could have stayed outside Russia, but his wife had chosen to stay back. So he went back, and he was sentenced to prison because he had broken the parole conditions. And he has been sent to a penal colony. Instead, he came back, he surrendered, and he has been sent to a penal colony. So this sanction is specifically against the jailing of Alexei Navalny, and before that, the incident of poisoning, which is still, to be fully unraveled. So the sanction is against 7 individuals who are part of the Russian FSB, which is their secret service, and it controls their internal security surveillance also. And 2 of the 7 individuals are deputy ministers in the Putin government. The other point which is of note is that the European Union has also joined hands with the US, and they have imposed sanctions on 4 of these individuals out of the 7. And in the case of the European Union, there has to be unanimity amongst the 27 countries before they can impose sanctions. So they have stopped short, well short of the US actions, because the US has also sanctioned 14 establishments. 9 of them are commercial enterprises in Russia. 1 of them is a research institute in Russia. 3 are in Germany and 1 in Switzerland. And all of them are involved with helping the Russian government make chemical and biological weapons in some way. So the whole issue is about one, about use of chemical weapons, especially this agent Novichok. And the second issue is about violation of human rights. So both these have been taken together. And many of the sanctions which were imposed in the wake of the Skripal incident in 2019, actually, they have been continued. So, for instance, World Bank loans are not available to Russian entities. Exim, the Export-Import Bank of the US, will not extend any credit, and various other things have been imposed.
I have 2 questions. First, is American government's policy pushing Russia into the arms of China because of such decisions? It only benefits China because Russia's reliance on China only grows by such sanctions. B, Biden is soft on China for any of such transgressions. Uh, do you think it is a case of misplaced foreign policy in that sense? Because it's not benefiting. It might uh, rather embolden China, because in the end, Russia's reliance on China only emboldens China. Plus, there is no action on China itself for whatever it does.
I think, again, I would differ slightly from this perception, which, of course, has many supporters. The Democrats traditionally have been upholders of human rights. They have taken this up very seriously. And one of the first things which the Biden administration did was to make public the findings in the Khashoggi case of Jamal Khashoggi's killing, and the evidence clearly points to the involvement of the Saudi prince who's at the helm of affairs. And in fact, President Biden refused to speak to Prince Salman, and he spoke instead to the king of Saudi Arabia. And he had an exchange of views. And so this is something which the Trump administration, in order to sell weapons to the Saudi Arabians, I think about $35-40 billion worth of weapons were sold.
$40 billion.
As a trade-off over a period of years, as a trade-off to brush it under the carpet, the inquiry which was going on. And this is something which the US has done, knowing fully well that the Saudis have been long-standing allies of the US. They are very large buyers of US weapons. And perhaps they have also acted as kingpins in the whole Middle East process. So knowing that fully well, the Biden administration has moved forward and done this. Now, the other point which needs to be remembered is that there is a theory, and there is some evidence also to that effect, that the Russians, or at least a part of the Russian system, had interfered in the 2016 elections of President Trump. And they had done so to the detriment of Hillary Clinton, who again was a part of the Obama administration, and she has worked very closely with President Biden. So the antipathy towards harsh action by the Russians, especially against people who are dissidents, I think has to be viewed in this perspective. Now, whether this will push the Russians closer into the embrace of the Chinese, that, of course, is quite correct in a sense. that if the West, especially Europe, shuns Russia as it did in 2014 with the sanctions because of Crimea. But in this case, in the Navalny case, their response has been very muted and tempered, because they have only issued sanctions against 4 of the officials and not a word about President Putin's involvement, or the official involvement of the government. So the the Europeans they have gone along with the US to a certain extent, but not fully. So the Russians are not going to really be at a disadvantage vis-a-vis the Europeans in a big way with this action. As far as China is concerned, the Russians already have a very close relationship with the Chinese, which is again getting mended and getting strengthened. But the Russians, I must also say, are equally skeptical of China's intentions on the international front. If you remember, in the late 80s, they had a problem along the Ussuri River, and there was an armed conflict. And then the Russians and the Chinese somehow came to a negotiated settlement. But there has been a problem because the Chinese are now laying stake to a part of Siberia as having been a part of imperial China many centuries ago. So there are issues which the Chinese have also been raising with the Russians. 2, the Chinese are getting into the sphere of influence of the Russians vis-a-vis the Commonwealth of Independent States. Countries like Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and the other Central Asian republics, they have benefited from Chinese largesse in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative. And the Russians seem to be giving ground to the Chinese and losing ground as a consequence. So the Russians are not very happy about that. And they will also try to stave off further influence of China in making inroads into their allies, politics, and their economies. So the Russians will get closer to the Chinese, but if you take it in on balance, the Russians do have very strong relations with the Chinese, but they also have good trade relations with the Europeans, the West Europeans, and the East Europeans. So I think it may just push the Russians a little bit towards China, but that is not going to be of great consequence. What is going to be of great relevance is that this is a signal to the Russians that they can't, carry on the way they had done during President Trump's regime, when he did not name President Putin, he did not take strong action against the Russians, even when this Skripal incident came to light. So that soft pedaling and using kid gloves with the Russians, because of various reasons, some of which are alleged to be Trump's close relationship with President Putin, and the kind of influence that President Putin had apparently held out for helping President Trump in his election bid. So that nobody knows really what is the truth, but these are allegations. So that is all now off the table. Now it is back to business as it was in the President Obama days or even before. And if the Russians, mind you, are a much weakened country now. The COVID pandemic has further weakened Russia. One of their main sources of revenue, which used to bring in a lot of foreign exchange, was oil and gas. And with the global economy slowing down considerably, the offtake of oil and gas has also come down. So the Russian economy has suffered a lot, and it is now slowly trying to get back on its feet. So issuing sanctions against Russia is far simpler than issuing sanctions against China, where the American industry, the large companies have a lot of investments in China. They are manufacturing, they are using China as a hub for their services industry. They are exporting, producing from China. So all that has to be factored into the equation. Whereas the Americans are not so heavily invested, the transnational corporations in Russia. So they can afford to take strong action against Russia, but not to the same extent against China.
Russia remains a large military hardware supplier to India. The supply of S-400 part payments have been made. Does these sanctions do indicate that will there be action against India if it goes ahead with the procurement of the S-400? Or in the interest that India has had long-standing military relations with Russia, but on the trade front, America is one of our strongest, in a sense, highest grossing trade partners. You think the Americans, the government, the system there will understand, and there won't be any action as such?
Well, part of the sanctions that the Americans have imposed in the Navalny case and even earlier was about withholding trade with the Russians on arms under the Arms Control Act and various other provisions dealing with munitions, for instance. So they don't want the Russians to really, go ahead and then also be capable of exporting to other countries. That is, the US armaments industry, apart from the political and international ramifications of this whole thing, the US armaments industry has never been in favor of Russia becoming one of the largest exporters of military hardware. So that is one factor. The second factor is that, Turkey has been sanctioned by the US because it procured S-400 weapon systems from the Russians. Now, the countries which have an S-400 system in the vicinity of India, China has already got S-400. And it is asking the Russians for an upgrade to S-500, which the Russians have declined, according to reports. S-500 is supposed to be even more advanced than the S-400. Now, S-400, we want to use it, and as you know, it is basically an air defense system. It is a system which will prevent missiles and air attacks from from taking place against India. And which are the two countries which will do that? One is the Pakistanis, and the other are the Chinese. Now, as far as the Pakistanis are concerned, there is a clause in their agreement, for instance, for their F-16 planes, that they will not use it against India. And this was one of the controversies which had arisen in the Balakot strike, when India showed them parts of a missile which is used by the F-16. And the debris had fallen on the Indian side. So we had collected it and shown it to the Americans. But the Americans have observers posted in Pakistan, to my knowledge, and they keep track of how the F-16s are used in Pakistan. So to that extent, whether Pakistan will defy the US, their agreement with the US, and use their airplanes which they have procured from the US against India is a matter of debate. But the more important thing is Pakistan has acquired a large number of aircraft, I think JF-17, which are basically versions of MiG-29 and MiG-35, and they have been produced in China. Of course, Pakistan claims that it has co-produced them. So these are available in large numbers, and they may be used in an attack against India if it comes to that. So India needs an air defense system which is capable of preventing an attack and doing so successfully. So now the US wants India to be its strategic partner. It has been saying it very openly, and it has also entered into various treaties and memoranda of understanding with India. India is also part of the Quad, which is the US, India, Japan, and Australia, which has been formed in the Indo-Pacific mainly to keep the trading channels open, to counter the aggressive intent of the Chinese, especially on the high seas, and to show force against the Chinese that if you decide to defy the international compact, then these forces will be ranged against you. So this S-400, we are trying to persuade the Americans that it is in our interest. It is not only in our defensive interest, but it will also help the Quad without really, putting India on the side of Russia vis-a-vis America or the US. So it has got no relationship with India joining the camp of the Russians. We already are using a large number of platforms, both for our infantry, our air force, and partly for our navy, which are of Russian origin. So that continues, and we have missile. We have, for instance, the BrahMos missile, which we are now we have started exploring the possibilities of exports. BrahMos is a missile system which has been developed along with the Russians, an Indian-Russian joint collaboration to develop a missile. So I don't think that Americans can take a very cut and dried approach to the import of S-400 by India from Russia and say that we will impose sanctions. That I think will be a very, very harsh decision on the part of the Americans, and it will have consequences.
Okay, that's interesting. One view also says that if there are sanctions against India, it may push India, in a sense, to go for its non-aligned approach, because India too has priorities in this region, in the sense that one is a military supplier, but with America there are deep ties of people-to-people movement, and being one of the largest trade partners with whom India has surpluses. So it is balancing two important partners, one on each side. As far as China is concerned, I want to understand from you. This year, China emerged as our single largest trade partner, uh, top of the list. It was kind of unexpected, but it happened. Where is this relationship going in relation to the American relationship with China? Now, India and China, where are they headed?
I think I'll first take up this issue of the US-China relationship. The US-China relationship will have to be recalibrated, because the US, I think, was oblivious to the fact that China was catching up very fast with the US in terms of technological progress, in terms of economic growth, in terms of pulling out people from poverty, and overall scientific discoveries. Even if you take, for instance, the number of patents which were being filed by Chinese scientists in China as well as elsewhere, it was one of the highest, if not the highest, in most areas in the world. So it has emerged, and President Biden was very openly, after his inauguration, he has acknowledged that the Chinese are the number two, and which was a well-known fact, but a clear acknowledgement of this fact, and that the Americans will need to keep one step ahead through the use of technology, and they will not allow China to catch up with them by using unfair means. I think that is the second part, is the implied message. So China will have to abide by its international commitments, whether they are in matters of the sea, for instance, keeping the sea channels open, the land boundaries with its neighbors. It has 12 or 13 neighbors with whom it shares a land boundary. And then on trade. So, and then finally, something which is now very much on the horizon is about how is space going to be utilized, about cyber warfare. Now, all these things will now get addressed not only by the US, but the West also. Europe also will have to now sit up and take note and take action. So there are going to be a lot of negotiations. Whenever a new world power emerges, it is not always that it gets resolved through war. There are negotiations, there may be skirmishes, there may be some limited scale war. And in today's world, I don't think anybody can afford a very long drawn out kind of a war, which we saw in, let's say, World War II or then the Korean or Vietnamese conflict. So there will have to be pressure on all fronts, and then there will have to be negotiations. And both sides will have to make compromises because the space will have to be vacated.
Now in about 30 seconds, because we're almost out of time on this show, we have almost 45 proposals for Chinese investment in India running into billions of dollars are in the process of getting an approval. Where is this relationship heading in about 30 to 40 seconds?
Well, the basic thing is that part of our Atmanirbhar Bharat, it is not directed particularly against China. It is that the Chinese cannot invest in areas which are of strategic importance to us and thereby compromise our national security. For instance, the power outages in Mumbai, which took place last year, have come into the headlines saying that the Chinese engineered it. That may or may not be true. Investigations, I'm sure, will be carried out. So that is one thing. Strategic assets or interests will not be compromised by allowing Chinese investments in those areas. The second thing is that China will be allowed to import, and I think it was there in today's papers, will be allowed to invest, provided they are not part of these strategic areas. So I think that sets it in, on balance. But the thing is that China will, for the moment, Chinese investments will have to undergo a lot of scrutiny, and the automatic approval route will not be allowed to them as of now.
Ambassador Dasgupta, always a pleasure talking to you. And today's was an interview where I think our viewers got a whole ringside view on the Indo-Russia, America-China, the Quad, and all these areas. We will take these talks further, but that's it for now. Thank you so much, viewers, for watching this show. Thank you so much, Ambassador Dasgupta, for making time and coming on the show. Thank you so much.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.